question of when and how the continent of Australia was first populated has always been a bit of a puzzle to archaeologists, but recently some new light has been shed on the problem. An international team of archaeologists, geographers, ecologists and computer scientists mapped the probable superhighways that led to the first peopling of the Australian continent around 50,000 to 70,000 years ago. The team generated a fascinating map which reveals these migration superhighways traversed by early humans in Australia, which mysteriously bear striking similarities to Australia's modern highways and stock routes. Some researchers have also suggested a connection between these newly discovered superhighways and the mysterious Aboriginal dreaming tracks. Over the years, there have been many theories about where the indigenous ancestors first settled in Australia tens of thousands of years ago, but evidence for this activity is extremely scarce. Only a very small number of archaeological sites date from these early times when sea levels were much lower and northern Australia was joined by a land bridge to present-day southern New Guinea and eastern Indonesia, and people and animals were able to walk at various times across to Tasmania from the mainland. This megacontinent, known as Sahul, was 30% larger than Australia is today. One of these early archaeological sites was at the now dry Lake Mungo in western New South Wales. Here, in 1968, Earth scientist Jim Bowler uncovered the cremated remains of an Aboriginal woman in an eroding dune close to the shoreline of the lake. In 1974, the ancient remains of a man were found nearby. Both of these remains, now called Mungo Lady and Mungo Man, were found to date back to a staggering 40,000 years, thus doubling scientific estimates of how long Aboriginal people had lived in Australia. The amazing discoveries at Lake Mungo reveal that Aboriginal history stretched back at times so remote that the only humans in Europe were Neanderthals, and people had not yet reached America. By about 70,000 years ago, modern humans, Homo sapiens, began moving into Southeast Asia, where they would probably have encountered existing groups of archaic humans like Homo erectus, Homo floresiensis, often referred to as the hobbits, and possibly also the mysterious Denisovans. In May 2021, it was announced that researchers had used supercomputers to simulate 125 billion possible travel routes and reconstruct the most likely superhighways. The first humans to arrive in Australia used to navigate across this new land more than 65,000 years ago. The international team of scientists who undertook the research was led by researchers from the Australian Research Council Centre of Excellence for Australian Biodiversity and Heritage, CABAR, and recently revealed some of their methods to the press. They said, "We think people navigated in new territories much as people do today, by focusing on prominent land features protruding above the relative flatness of the Australian continent. To map these features, we built the most complete digital elevation model for Sahul ever constructed, including areas now underwater. We used this digital elevation model to understand what was visible to early travelers. Essentially, from each point in the continent, we asked, 'What can you see from here?' This moving window calculates the largest viewshed map ever created. When our virtual travelers move, they reorient based on visible terrain everywhere they go." For their work, the researchers created an imaginary traveler, a 25-year-old woman carrying 10 kilograms of supplies to traverse the landscape. They collected all the various pieces of data they accumulated into a mega model known as From Everywhere to Everywhere, FEAT, and created over 125 billion possible pathways from every spot on the continent to everywhere else. Each route represented the easiest way to move from one location to another. Obviously, the researchers could not possibly examine every path of the 125 billion pathways that they had created, so they reduced the number by comparing all plausible pathways with the distribution of the oldest known archaeological sites on the ancient continent, providing weighted possibilities for each path. This work produced a scale of pathways going from the most likely to the least likely chosen paths. The most likely pathways in the map above are what the researchers called the superhighways of the first indigenous populations on the continent. The team's conclusion, drawn from their computer-generated maps, is that the early populations spread across the now submerged wide plains on the western and eastern margins of the continent and through to the region that now forms the Gulf of Carpentaria, the large shallow sea which now connects Australia to New Guinea. The nagging question of whether there was evidence that anyone had actually used these computer-identified highways in the remote past was soon answered by their research. A large number of archaeological sites in Australia, known to be at least 35,000 years old, were located on or near these superhighways, and many tracks also coincided with ancient trade routes known from the oral histories of the indigenous people, or agreed with genetic and linguistic studies used to trace early human migrations. But these superhighways may well have been much more than routes used for the initial peopling of Sahul. A number of these superhighways identified by the research team follow well-known Aboriginal trade routes which cross the country. These include the route from Cape York to South Australia via Birdsville, used by traders of Pituri native tobacco, and the trade of Kimberley Baler shell into Central Australia. There are also obvious similarities between the researchers' map of ancient highways and the most common trading and stock routes used by early Europeans, which is not surprising as they followed established routes long used by the Aboriginal peoples. The researchers' groundbreaking work on these superhighways has impressed the archaeological community. Archaeologist Kyle Bokinski of the University of Montana, Missoula, said, "This is a really compelling illustration of the power of using these simulation techniques at a huge continental scale to understand how people navigate landscapes. It's impressive, extreme computing." One intriguing aspect of this new research is that it has revealed major routes that cut across several dry areas in Australia's centre and in the northeastern state of Queensland. The existence of paths in such locations would appear to challenge the long-held view that the earliest people on the continent avoided the deserts. Kabah Deputy Director, Distinguished Professor Sean Ulm from James Cook University, commented on the importance of the research team's work in revealing the significance of landscape to the native inhabitants of the continent. He said, "Australia is not only the driest, but also the flattest populated continent on Earth. Our research shows that prominent landscape features and water sources were critical for people to navigate and survive on the continent. In many Aboriginal societies, landscape features are believed to have been created by ancestral beings during the dreaming. Every ridgeline, hill, river, beach and water source is named, storied and inscribed into the very fabric of societies, emphasizing the intimate relationship between people and place. The landscape is literally woven into people's lives and their histories. It seems that these relationships between people and the country probably date back to the earliest peopling of the continent." This quote brings in a question of a connection between these newly revealed superhighways and Aboriginal dreaming tracks. To the Aborigine, a dreaming track or songline, as it is also known, is a route taken by ancestral heroes in the dream time, in which all Aboriginal culture has its roots and before which, in their minds, the Earth did not exist. As with the ancient superhighways, these mostly invisible paths or tracks usually connect Aboriginal sacred sites. In the dream time, groups of ancestral beings journeyed across the land, performing mighty deeds and creating the living species and features of the desert landscape. The adventure of these ancestors, also referred to as totemic ancestors, are chronicled in sacred songs, stories, and rituals. These totemic ancestors also established the rules of Aboriginal religion, law, moral systems, and social life. In the mind of the Aborigine Dreamtime is a true record of how the landscape was formed, a landscape which is still inhabited by the spirits of their ancestor beings. By reenacting the myths in the Dreamtime in song, story, and ceremony, the Aborigines keep their ancestors' rules, beliefs, and relationships with the landscape alive. The massive rock form of Ayers Rock, Uluru in the local Anagu language, is an isolated sandstone outcrop rising 1,140 feet above the Red Desert Plain in the Northern Territory of Central Australia, 208 miles southwest of Alice Springs. This sacred place is seen by the Anangu as a living record of the dreamtime activities of their ancestors, and the appearance and origin of every feature of the giant rock is present on the mental map carried around by the Anangu people of the area. One reason why the local Anangu population prefer tourists not to climb the rock is that the hiking path crosses one of the many traditional dreaming tracks on the site. Hopefully, future work on possible connections between these fascinating superhighways and Aboriginal dreaming tracks might reveal important insights into the spiritual nature of both. During the drought which resulted from the unusually hot summer of 2019, the shoreline of the Tagus River in central Spain receded, revealing a 6,000-year-old circular monument in the middle of the Valdecañas Reservoir. Known as the Dolmen of Guadalperal, this megalithic monument consists of more than 100 standing granite stones, some up to 6 feet tall, arranged in an 85-foot diameter circle. Some researchers believe that one of the stones in the monument has what may be the world's oldest map carved on it. But who built it, and what was it used for? The discovery of the monument. In 1963, a megalithic monument known as the Dolmen of Guadalperal, which stood on the banks of the Tagus River, disappeared under the water of the newly constructed reservoir northeast of Extremadura, a region of western Spain bordering Portugal on its western side. After the construction, only the tips of the largest megaliths were occasionally visible above the waterline. Surprisingly, there seems to be no outcry at the submergence of this ancient monument, certainly nowhere near the level of the reaction of archaeologists, historians, and the public if the government planned to do something similar today. But the Dolmen of Guadalperal is far from being the only ancient monument in Spain which has become submerged over the last few decades. Spanish archaeologist Primitiva Buena Ramirez commented that you couldn't believe how many authentic archaeological and historic gems are submerged under Spain's man-made lakes. Enrique Carrillo Cuenza, a researcher from the Spanish National Research Council, added, "We know dolmens submerged in reservoirs in other points of the Tagus, such as Guadalcanal, a few kilometers downstream from the Guadalperal. In 2019, it was revealed in the media that Spain's extremely dry summer had caused the waters of Valdecañas Reservoir to recede, uncovering the dolmen, which had largely been forgotten about by local inhabitants. Angel Castano, resident of a nearby village and president of a local history and cultural society, said of the discovery, "All my life, people have told me about the dolmen. I'd seen parts of it peeking out from the water before, but this is the first time I've seen it in full. It's spectacular because you can appreciate the entire complex for the first time in decades. We grew up hearing about the legend of the treasure hidden beneath the lake, and now we can finally get to view them. There certainly may have been treasures buried beneath the stones once upon a time, but for us now, the treasure are the stones themselves." Unfortunately, the submergence in water for so long has damaged parts of the monument. The engravings on one of the porous granite stones have eroded. Others show signs of erosion too, and have fallen over or are already beginning to split. The dolmen had first been excavated between 1925 and 1927 by German archaeologist Hugo Obermeier, but it wasn't until 4 decades later that Obermeier's report on his excavations of the ancient structure was finally published. The excavations also uncovered artifacts thought to have been used by the builders of the monument, which suggested that they had lived nearby during its construction. The site would have been created over thousands of years using granite transported from kilometers away. Like Stonehenge, the megaliths formed a sun temple and burial ground. They seem to have a religious but also economic purpose, being at one of the few points of the river where it was possible to cross, so it was a sort of trading hub. The dolmen of the Guadalparal consists of about 140 granite boulders, the highest of which reach 6.6 feet in height, arranged in an 80-foot 5-diameter concentric circle. Archaeologists believe, like Castano, that the monument was probably used as both a temple and a cemetery between 4000 and 2500 BC. At an early stage in its development, the monument consisted of tall, upright stones known as menhirs, which were topped by horizontal slabs of stone to form an enclosed single-chambered tomb known as a dolmen. An engraved menhir stood at the structure's entrance. An ancient map. The engraved stone at the entrance of the dolmen of Guadalparal has become the source of much controversy in recent months. The stone bears an engraving of a human figure on one side, and on the other a wavy symbol, which could represent a snake or perhaps the nearby Tagus River. Angel Castano believes the winding line on the stone represents what would have been the world's first map. He believes that the curves may correspond to the meanders of the Tagus River and may have been used as a guide to navigate it. The Tagus River is the longest river on the Iberian Peninsula, flowing 626 miles, generally in a western direction. Up until the Roman period, it's believed that the area where the dolmen of Guadalparal is located was the only natural ford on the river, hence its vital importance. Indeed, the presence of numerous ancient remains in the area testifies to this importance. The ancient Roman city of Augustobriga stood here, but like the dolmen of Guadalparal, was submerged by water in the early 1960s when the Valdecanasias reservoir was built. Other Extremadura dolmens. The region of Extremadura possesses many other prehistoric monuments, including dolmens extremely similar in design to that at Guadalparal. Indeed, there are 41 examples in a small area around the towns of Valencia de Alcantara and San Vicente de Alcantara in western Extremadura, close to the Portuguese border. Indeed, it contains the largest collection of dolmens in the Iberian Peninsula. 33 of these monuments are constructed in granite, while 8 were made using slate. The Dolmen del Melizo is located in the village of Asenya de la Borrega in the province of Cáceres in Spain. It's one of the only dolmens in Extremadura where the chamber is still covered by its original overhanging capstone. The granite slab dolmen has an oval chamber and consists of 8 supporting stones, some of which are unfortunately broken. But prehistoric dolmens are not confined to the Iberian Peninsula. They are found in a variety of places throughout the world. The highest concentration of dolmens is in northwest Europe, especially in Brittany, France, southwestern Scandinavia, Britain, Ireland, Belgium and the Netherlands. They are also known from parts of Africa and Asia. The dolmens of northwest Europe were built in the early Neolithic period, which began in Brittany about 5000 BC, and in Britain, Ireland and southern Scandinavia about 4000 BC. The Breton word dolmen was originally used to describe a variety of megalithic monuments all over the world, but although there is considerable diversity in the monument types, they nevertheless share many common characteristics. All dolmens consist of a large capstone or capstones supported by a number of smaller, upright stones. This arrangement of stones creates an enclosed chamber area. Excavations have shown that the majority of dolmens were used for the burial of the dead. In some of these monuments, the remains of numerous people were discovered, mixed together in a communal deposit. Archaeologists believe these collections of bones may represent ancestral remains and that dolmens were not only burial sites, but also primitive temples where the ancestors may have been venerated. One of the most puzzling aspects of the dolmens is the massive size of the stones, particularly the capstone or capstones used to construct them. For some reason, the builders chose the largest and heaviest stones they could find, the majority of which they dressed and shaped before putting them in place. How and why they did this is still a perplexing mystery to archaeologists. Unfortunately, the future of the dolmen of Guadalparal is still uncertain. Castano has organized a group of concerned local residents who are campaigning to have the stone monument moved to a site on dry land before the waters rise again. And they are lost for who knows how long and perhaps damaged beyond repair. Castano explained, "If we miss the chance, it could be years before they are revealed again. and the stones, which are granite and therefore porous, are already showing signs of erosion and cracking. So if we don't act now, it will be too late. It isn't a difficult thing to move them. We have machinery now to do that. Let's just hope that there is the political will to save them while we can. Castano and his group created an online petition to save the monument, which obtained over 44,000 signatures. However, the Spanish Ministries of Culture and Sport and Ecological Transition, along with the team from the University of Extremadura, decided that the transportation of the megaliths would damage the dolmen. So the dolmen of Guadalparal remains where it is, waiting to be submerged once again beneath the waters of the Valdecañas Reservoir.